Välkommen och varsågod.
Be
my guest.
Thank you. I have to switch to English. It's easier for me to do in English than that I try to do it to you in Norwegian and you have to translate anyway. So thanks for having me. I feel very, very honored to be here in this nice place and full house. And to be asked to talk about my hobby. For my daily bread, I work as a safety advisor for the Norwegian Police Directorate, and I work mostly with occupational safety for our people. But as you can imagine, that's very fluent in police because you come into societal safety and security and personal without any problems. Today I'm going to talk about safety fairy tales and things we think may improve safety, but maybe do, but not so much as we think, and just have some reflections around them. And I am planning to do it on 3 subjects. The first will be, is it safe? A big question, an important question, and one that we maybe take very easily for granted. The second, it will be a very natural transition into a risk. I guess all of you have been involved in risk assessments of some kind, and you do them all the time. So we will think a little about that. And then we will go over to what causes most accidents, which is another big question, and one that is probably one of the most mistaken of all. And I can talk hours without end about this, I know that. So stop me if it's 12, and I know I have the toughest job because I keep you from lunch. Safety myths. What is that? If you read the book, you don't need to, but it would be nice, you won't find the definition. And it's just a thing I started writing about a few years ago after talking to some friends. And we talked about myths and things that safety people take for granted and just believe without any foundation. And that's basically what a myth is. It's a popular belief or a tradition that has grown around something. And safety has a lot of them, if you think a bit deeper. And I collected actually 123 in the book, and I divided them over some chapters just to have some kind of order in them. And there are little stories about, for example, how we use our language, which is very important in safety, because it's so easy to become normative and have an opinion. And I'm going just to pick a few now in my presentation. But first, one thing to think about. We might think, well, it's a myth, it's not science, it's not based on fact, it must be bad. And my answer, and it's a theme, that depends. It depends very much on what you want to achieve. Myths are actually very important for us. They are how we get things done, they are how we unite, they provide us with some kind of common thing, and they are very powerful to deliver lessons. I think most of you will have kids, and then you have myths like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. There's, by the way, a basket in the back. An apple keeps the doctor only away if you throw it at him really, really hard. You won't keep him away by eating one every day. But vitamins are good for you. So the science is vitamins are good for you and a balanced diet is etc. etc. The apple in itself may help. So myths are actually useful, but not the truth. So this is what this balance shows. It depends a lot on what you want to achieve. Myths are very convincing. very easy to tell, very easy to remember. That's why they're great. But we have also to think. And you can probably tell me a lot of aviation myths. I'm not from aviation, so I've worked in railways, which is like aviation, only in 2D. Yes, and this is really the first rule. You do not have to agree with me. The only thing I want is think. Think for yourself, disagree with me, and discuss. And that's cool. And I think that that's really important that we think, because a lot of these safety myths, they masquerade as safety rules or safety theory or safety science, and then while they serve other goals, and then they take safety as a kind of hostage. In Norwegian we have the saying, and maybe the Swedish have it too, ta sikkerhet som gissel. Do you have it? Whatever. It's not the real goal, but you use safety to get a raise, for example. It's a great example. Even in police. Yes, and that brings us to the first big question of today. Is it safe? And I've brought this distinguished gentleman. Anyone knows him? Dr. Zell. He's the bad guy from the Marathon Man. Very cool movie. And in one key scene, he asked the poor hero, anti-hero of the movie, is it safe? And the hero, who is tied to a chair and is going to be tortured, he hasn't a clue what he's talking about. But how would we answer the question, is it safe? We have probably some feeling about safety. And one way of thinking about safety is, of course, are we following the rules? This is how we teach our children about safety, I think. When you are going to cross the street, you don't teach them about risk assessments and stuff. You say, red means car may be coming, means stop. Wait, green, cross. That's how we teach children. There's another way that the children learn about safety, I think, and that's the trial and error, which is a very powerful way. You say to them, do not touch the stove, it's hot. They wait till you are turned, they try, and they never do it again. But this is how we start with safety often. Rules. Very simple, red is stop, green is go. But is this really true? Does it mean that following the rule is safe? Maybe, most of the time, but not always. and following the rule at night, when there's no cars, it doesn't make it safer. So rules are really important for a number of reasons, and this list could probably be much, much longer. Because they simplify a situation for us. When I get to this crossing, I see the red light, I still have to look, but most likely it's, well, green go, red stop. I don't need to think a lot and assess, and this car is so big and so fast, and so, etc. Well, follow the rule. So they save time. Somebody else did the thinking for you, did the really difficult stuff before, and they share the experience. I think a lot of the rules in aviation and railways, where I come from originally, a lot of the rules are actually experiences from accidents that happened. Hey, we can learn from this, let's make a rule so everybody does it better next time and safer next time. I mean, we become really good at that. So, experience, good practice, and I give a baseline. You wait at least and when it's green and you see a car coming really fast, you stop anyway, you don't cross. But as I said, there are a lot of limitations also. Rules are not perfect. Rules are not the only thing. And I think Lars is going to spend some more time on it this afternoon, on rules. So I'm trying to do this fast. But one thing is they compromise, and often they serve other goals. If you look at the EU regulations, they have titles like Safety Directive. In railways we had one that was, it was called Safety Directive, very simply. What it was really about was that trains could pass borders without being hindered by safety issues. You should have a common safety baseline. The goal was not primary safety, the goal was transport through the whole of Europe. And there's a lot of those things. If you look at this thing, it probably has somewhere a CU mark, which says it fills some minimum safety rules, but it's free trade, the CE thing. Yes. A rule cannot foresee everything. A rule is often based on the average situation, based on some assumptions, and has a lot of specialities which you cannot write down because the rule book would be like this, and I've seen some aviation rule books and they are like this, I believe, but still you haven't caught everything. So they give a minimum. And I often oversimplify, and what is really tricky, they may give a false sense of security. If I follow the rule, I'm safe. What if you cross at green and that car is coming with a drunk driver? You're not safe, even though you followed the rule. And a bigger example, Piper Alpha. You've probably heard about it. What was it, 162 or 169 people died in that big fire and explosion there. The ones that survived did not follow the rule. They did not go to the designated evacuation spot. They just jumped overboard and swam away. The ones who were in the safe place, they died. So, rules do have limitations, and they can actually be a hinder for innovation and creativity. You've probably all heard the rule, we've done it always this way, we don't need to change. Which stops your creativity. Maybe you do have a great idea, but the rule says no. Then there is a second way how we think about safety. And try to answer the question, is it safe? First was, are we following the rule? Not a perfect way, give some answer. The second one is, we look at, have there been any accidents or serious incidents? Is this a good answer to, is it safe? If I get drunk tonight at the perfect dinner we get, and I think, let's go for a little stroll downtown. I get in my car and drive there, park it, no accident on the way, no run down children and grandmas. Was that safe? I don't think so. If I go in bath and while I'm there I think, let me be effective, and I blow dry my hair, which is rather hypothetical, would that be safe? Even if I don't have an accident? No. So, no accident does not mean safe. It may mean sheer luck, or other factors, or when it comes to reporting, I don't know if you have them at your airports. We all know these signs, I think. Maybe they're just good at lying, that they have 200 and something days. And why shouldn't they lie? Because we are counting on you. So if you have that accident, was you who ruined our record. And who wants that one on his rap sheet? And, well, taking this a bit further, are consequences a good measure of anything then? Because we tend to measure at the end here how many fatalities have been on a project or an airline or whatever, how many injuries, how many, you have this with this lost, what is it, proximity or whatever. We're very much at the back end where we measure and have an opinion on how safe are things. But is that really a good measure? Because if you look at the process that you really can control, you can, to some degree, control your input. I think you screen your students before you take them in. They have to understand some language, they have some eyesight, medical, etc. Then you train them, you have control there. And, well, you deliver something to them, some training, then a lot of stuff happens. What happens afterward? Should you be blamed for the students that crash planes afterwards, for example? So, maybe we shouldn't focus here to decide whether something is safety. Maybe we should rather look at the things that come before. That's my message. And this is a very good and famous example, a very tragic example also, of how things can go really wrong because people were looking at the wrong things. We know, you know, that what this is Deepwater Horizon. And afterwards we know, well, they screwed up a lot of things. Before they screwed up a lot of things, they were the top one rig. If you had a difficult job, deep drilling in difficult conditions, they were the crew to call. They fixed the difficult jobs and they did it really safely because the day before they had the big fire, they had a celebration, 7 years without one lost time injury, which is great. So they were really good at occupational safety. They were neglecting the fact that they were actually working safely on a time bomb. And they ignored a lot of other issues. So they had some focus, okay, but they forgot to see the whole picture. This is what can happen if you think, well, safety is no accidents, no injuries. Because injuries are not a predictor for this kind of thing. And it can go even further. Some of you have probably heard of Judgement. Swedish traffic was the first, I think, in the world. And they use it actually quite nuanced, I think, and to good effect. In Norway, Norwegian Railways, where I worked, we took over some of that. But there are people who actually think a zero vision means thou shalt have no accidents, no injuries. And then this is a firm that is called Swiss Colony. I don't know what they do, I just found it on the internet and thought this is a good example where this kind of thinking can lead to what kind of, sorry for saying it, idiotic language. And I start here. They don't say all accidents are preventable. Accidents are often preventable. The thing is, we know that afterwards. And prevention is something you do before an accident happens. So this statement is a bit of nonsense. It should say, every accident is something we can learn of. That would be a good conclusion that I would fully support. But saying afterwards, yeah, it could have been prevented. Yeah, we know that now. But did we know it before? That is much more interesting question. And also the thing, and I'm actually struggling with this, are accidents unacceptable? They are unwanted, for sure, because we don't want anybody hurt in our company, organization, or outside of it. But does that make them really unacceptable? And should we say unacceptable? Because unacceptable means, if Lars has that accident, does that mean that we don't accept what he did? Per definition, I have a problem with that. Because maybe it just happened to him because of things he couldn't control, over him or outside of him. And then these two, this is nonsense. A zero accident goal does not make economic sense. As I said, I worked in the Norwegian railways, and we had about 4,000 level crossings. I don't know how many there are in Sweden, and I know they're better protected in Sweden. In Norway there are about 500 of those do have barriers which lock out car traffic, or at least prevent them from entering the rails. That means 3,500 do not have that protection. And cars can drive on the rails, and sometimes the car is hit. And now Norwegian does have some money in the bank, so they could probably say, well, let's protect them all, because all accidents are preventable and we want that. But why should we protect these level crossings in the middle of the woods, where there's one car in a week and a low chance of hitting them? So does it really make economic sense if you take it to the extreme? It doesn't. Often an accident is more expensive than what you have to pay to prevent it, but that doesn't mean that you have to prevent every possibility, because you just can't. And that brings me to the last one here, on the top. Is it the only goal? It's a bad goal, we saw that, because no incidents, no accidents, no injuries doesn't mean safe. So it's a bad goal. And why should we have those goals at all? Why not have a positive goal? Like you, I guess you are teachers and you don't have the goal, I shall have 0 bad students this year. You have rather a goal of, I shall have as many good students as I have with as great grades as possible. Something like that, which is possible and which is positive. And then you can have goals where you give yourself a goal for how am I going to achieve this, which is also positive. I'm going to do good preparations, I'm going to do good screenings, and whatever you do as a teacher. So, only goal? Bullshit. Sorry, but... And here's Mr. Zell again. And Mr. Zell is a really bad guy. He doesn't like all this talk about, yeah, maybe it's a bit so and a bit so. He wants a precise answer. And the problem is, we all want that. We don't torture people with drills and stuff in their teeth. But we want this kind of answer. Is it safe or is it unsafe? And sometimes we can be so clear. If I get in that car drunk, it will not be safe. I'm on the black side. But mostly it's more like, it's more than 50 shades of grey here. But we are talking about some kind of a continuum, a spectrum. And it's very much depends on the situation. Where are we? Am I in the dark grey, in the very dark grey, drunk as I am, going to drive, in a big car, kids playing outside? We are definitely here. Me walking around on this stage, I'm probably in a whitish area. So, is it safe? It depends. That's often the only correct answer. It's not one you want to hear, and it's definitely not the answer he wants. But it's, yeah, we have to learn with it and talk about it. Know where we are, approximately, and also know how much do we accept. Take the level crossings. Are we saying we want them all very, very safe in the white? Or are we saying as a society we have bigger problems than, 2 fatalities on level crossings per year? Let's rather put the money into healthcare or whatever. It's that balance. And then you decide where you want to be, what shade of grey you like. Which brings me to the next subject. Risk. And risk is a funny thing with a lot of misunderstandings. And one of those is many people think when you talk about risk and risk assessments, like I do all day long on my job, people think that's something very, very difficult and theoretical and like huge reports, big papers, calculations and stuff, and very hard to do. A few years ago, I think 3 years ago, it was when I started in the police, I was invited with some of my colleagues to a police station in the western part of the country. And the station chief there, he presented himself and told about how they worked with the community and how they kept the order, because it was a busy town in summertime, a lot of people with their boats and beer outside, etc., and parties in the weekend and all summer long. And how they managed that, how they planned when they were going to patrol, to do a patrol, how they cooperated with the bar owners, etc. Great story. And they had really control and good success. And then some questions were asked to us, and we are in this big reorganization, as every organization is all the time. And we were asked, how are you handling the risk for the people? How do you evaluate arbeidsmiljø? And well, we discussed risk assessments and how we dealt with that. And then the station chief, he said, "Oh, these risk assessments, I'm so lucky I don't have to do them." I said, "Man, you talked 3 quarters without an end about how you managed risk, how you did risk assessment planning, where you had your people and how you cooperated with other players. That's and he was, is that risk assessment? Wow, I'm good." And people, we do risk assessments all along. If I get to that street, I stop up maybe for a millisecond, I look around me, left, right, left. Eric will tell you afterwards he looks right, left, right. And if there's no car coming, I get going, and I may moderate my pace to the speed of the cars approaching. That was a risk assessment I did. I didn't write it down, I didn't make a matrix or a calculation. We are good at this, most of the time. And sometimes we need to be more formal, like when you're going to fly or do some operation, of course. But it's the same principle at basics. So the basics we handle, and for the really difficult stuff, hire some experts to help you. And one important point here. When we talk about risk, we do it mostly, and that's natural, that's our language. I said language matters. Risk, we talk always about it, or nearly always, as something that is bad, something negative. There's a risk of having an accident, there's a risk of such and so. But is it only negative? here, this firm thinks it is, because it warns us about hot coffee. Now, if you go to, Espresso House, for example, and you order a coffee, and you get a really lukewarm one or a cold one, go to the cashier and say, "Thank you for handing me the best and safest coffee ever." Like, no. You complain because you want hot coffee. Coffee should be hot unless you order frappuccino or something. So, there's actually a positive side in risk. And I think you guys fly, I don't, only as a passenger. So for me it's not fun, but I guess for you it's big fun to be flying, and that feeling must be great. I can only imagine that. People want risk because of the positive things, because of the kick it gives us, because of other things we want. If you want to learn, you have to risk something. If you want to earn money, you have to risk something. If you want to have children and have sex, you have to risk a lot. So, risk is not necessarily bad. Risk is actually something we need all of the time. And I'm not going to spend many words on this, but there seems to be this confusion that risk and safety are opposites. And I'm coming from Germany. I still haven't found out why you find only German science like this. It's like safety and risk are two different things, and they are not. Safety is where you are on that scale of grey we had on screen afterwards. That is safety. Which means you need risk, else you don't have safety. You know these ones? Seen them before? Yes, no. I have to wake you because it's only 20 minutes to lunch, so you have to be ready. This is a known formula. Probably it looks a bit different in Swedish, I don't know, where risk is likelihood times severity or consequence. Sannsynlighet or konsekvens. Exactly the same.
Exactly the same,
yeah. And this is the graphic form of it, and Michael had the red, yellow, green already. This is where it comes from. And maybe the matrix looks a bit different, but the principle is, if there is a high chance, we are here, high likelihood of something really bad happening, we call that big risk. The low chance and low, we call it a small risk, and we have a lot of in between. That's as simple as it is. And these are great tools, and this works exactly the same, only with numbers. You say low is 1, and low here is also 1, and then risk 1 is low risk, and if you have 5 times 5, then 25 is up here. And it works really well, and it gives you a neat order to sort things. Like we saw in Michael's presentation, the red risks, the ones up here, big consequences, large likelihood, big problems, we have to deal with those first. Makes sense. So, great tool, but, of course, there's a but. Let's take this example, which is from Terje Aven from Stavanger University. And he uses this to remind us severity, consequence, and likelihood. They're not everything. There are other things too. Say we walk on the street in Stockholm, some guy comes and says, "Shall we play a game? I have a die here. Let's throw it, and when I throw a 6, I win. You pay me 2,400 kroner. But if you throw a 1 to 5, I'll give you 600. Should we do that? Should we play that game? If you've been to school, you know the risk. We call it expected value. You may remember, or you may hate remembering statistics class, but expected value, that's the risk on winning minus the risk of losing, which is 5 out of 6 times 600 minus 1 out of 6 times 2,400 is plus 100. So mathematically speaking, if we follow the risk formula, this is a great deal. We should do it, and we should do it often. What is the problem? What are we forgetting? If this guy, this Dutch Norwegian guy, approaches you on a street in Stockholm and says, "Hey, I have a fun game to play with you, which I am, statistically speaking, going to lose," what is probably the deal? The deal is, of course, those die are probably not. There's probably not a 1 out of 6 chance that I'm going to win. It's probably much higher. So what is the problem? Mathematics don't say a thing about assumptions here. We have the assumption, this is a very trustworthy guy, look, he has this nice shirt and he has a badge from the seminar, so we can trust him. But that isn't how life often is. And the problem is, assumption can cost you money. Assumptions can also be fatal, and this is a famous example. You know the boat, of course. That's the Titanic. One of the few pictures we have of it, when it looked that way. And here were a lot of fatal assumptions. They had the assumption the boat couldn't sink. Well, actually it could sink, but you had to penetrate 6 or more of these compartments. Yeah, they managed that. The boat could handle 5, they penetrated 6, just. The other thing was, the compartments, they were assumed to be watertight. They were that way, not that way. And when the boat tilted, the water just kept flowing in more and more compartments. Another assumption was, we have more than enough lifeboats. They had more than the rules prescribed they should have. And at the time, the procedure was, there's probably a ship nearby, we just get in the boats and we transport the shipwrecked people to the other boat, and then we can manage them all, even though we don't have 100% capacity. Assumption, 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 1100 dead. And the problem is we need assumptions. But it's very important then to be clear about, sorry about that, be clear about what assumptions are we making and try to be specific about them. Like, I think this guy doesn't have a true die. And it's especially important when we get to, and I think aviation has a lot of these fancy calculations. And the calculations can't communicate all those assumptions and stuff we put into our analysis. Like this poor manager, he hears this gibberish, which is actually taken from a job I've been in. And I had to look up what TR impairment frequency actually meant. The only thing the manager hears, which satisfies, and he shuts off and thinks, okay, this is great. He doesn't know what is underlying this conclusion. This guy who has done the calculation, he knows. He's the one who should take the decision. He's actually the one who has now taken the decision because he doesn't know what he was saying, which is a very strange situation. So using normal language instead of a color, instead of a number, is often very helpful. And I have to speed up a bit, I see. That brings us to the question, how do people in daily life handle risks? And are they totally nuts? Because from a rational point speaking, There are reports saying that this installation is super safe, 10 minus 9, blah blah blah. But nobody wants this in his backyard, because if it goes wrong that one time in a billion, and it did in Chernobyl, and it did in Fukushima, and it almost did at 3 Mile Island, and you can't live in your house for 10,000 years. That's a problem. So, we don't want that. Even if engineers say this is the safest thing ever. On the other hand, we do stuff like that, which is in Norway, Skjærpolten, near Stavanger. And what is the gain of doing this? 200 likes on Facebook? Is that worth risking a tumble down 600 meters? You're pretty dead when you're there. So, it must be a great rush for him, but never in my life. And then, well, this. I'm not going to judge you. I took part in the Dutch one myself when we lived there. But it's actually documented on the net that it's probably better to burn these 50 crown or whatever a lottery ticket costs. That gives you at least some heat. But we do it because it's in our mind. We buy the ticket and we think, if I win the jackpot tomorrow, I'm so going to cancel my job and buy this island and a boat and whatever. Only that feeling is probably worth it. So are we irrational? No. But keep in mind, people make their decisions on risks not always, mostly not, based on matrices and calculations. We do it on gut feelings. Lars is going to talk about heuristics later. And here are a lot of these kinds of, yeah, well, maybe, but I don't feel like it, whatever, kind of things. Let's speed through the last question. What causes most accidents? If I ask you, what is the biggest problem in aviation? Someone, please, I need a drink. Well, I'll tell you what the internet said, because I googled it. If you don't know the question, you just put it in Google. What causes most accidents? This is my translation. But according to media review and Boeing, interestingly enough, most accidents are caused by human error. And I would expect a manufacturer of a plane to say that, because that puts the problem elsewhere. Has any of you read the novel Airframe by Michael Crichton, the Jurassic guy? Can recommend it, but there you find a different answer. It's a great book, very safety and it's exciting. Anyway, this is the public opinion. It's also what you hear in the newspaper. An accident happened, and the first question is, was it human error or was it a mechanical failure? Like those two are the only options. But it's what it's asked. And most often, before even a day is over, someone has concluded, well, it must have been a pilot error or human error or the driver error or whatever error. Something human anyway. And where does it come from? Here's another myth, very well disguised as science. Because there was a guy, which I'm studying incidentally, called Heinrich, and he drew this very neat picture, and he had found out that of the several 10,000 cases that he had looked at or not had looked at, 88% was human error, unsafe acts, only 10% was in the machinery, and then he had some 2% that he, well, I don't think he called it, but say act of God. I think that were outside of our control. And this seems to make sense. Because if you look at accidents, there tends to be some kind of an act by someone in the flow that was wrong. Maybe the pilot should have pushed the other button, or maybe the flight controller should have assessed the situation otherwise, or whatever. The problem is, this guy Heinrich, he talked about the things that happened right before the accident. He had a lot of other problems with his data. And yeah, the only thing he actually said was, if there's an accident, if you really take it down, if there's an accident, there's a human involved. Which is like, yeah, duh, because would we be otherwise interested? We are typically not reading in newspaper about accidents between ants or cats or whatever. So, yeah, of course, there's a human involved. Lars, there's something happening here on your machine. I just say, oh, wait. We fixed it, human error, machine error. And here went something wrong. But what is human error really? It's nothing but a judgment. It's a label we stick on some kind of act. Because what do we need before we can call something a human error? There are at least two things we need and one thing we need to do. The first thing is, it has happened already. We look at it in hindsight, in retrospect. It has happened. We cannot say this is going to be an error before it has happened. The second thing is, we look at the outcome. If it went well, it was an error, then it was genius, it was innovative, it was creative. Post-it, champagne, penicillin, there were actually errors, if you want to, because people didn't do what they should have done. And it turned out great, but we don't call them errors. And there's one other problem. First was hindsight, the second, we are biased by the consequence. The third is, it strips away all context. It zooms in on just one factor. We decide we have to look at what this guy did wrong then. And forgets everything that was in the society, in organization, in his education, in technical system, etc., etc. We'll skip that one. So, instead of doing stuff like this, where we try to put things in neat boxes to decide what are we going to do with the person. Was it an honest mistake? Was it risky behavior, which you guys display all the time because you go flying, which is very unnatural? Was it maybe even reckless behavior? We try to put things in boxes, and what's the use? Does it really give us an answer? It does if we want to punish someone. That's great. I started with this balance, where what goal are we serving? If you want to serve some justice, then this is probably a good way of asking. If you want safety, it's better to look, why did it make sense for him or her? Because pilots typically don't want to crash their planes. I know there are some exceptions, but I think most don't want to. Most car drivers don't want to make accidents. People I work with, police officers, certainly don't want to be shot. So. And can we actually judge just from seeing somebody doing something? We are so quick to judge, to say, well, you shouldn't have done that, idiot. That's an error. But can we actually? I found this one at the police station in Alta, in the up north in Norway. And I thought this is a great example of how judgmental we actually are and how quick we are to judge. How do we know that this funny behavior that somebody displays, we're probably going to say, well, he must be drunk, or what an idiot, what a moron, or what if he actually does have this uncontrollable disease that makes him act funny? So I think it's very important for people like me, safety people, and probably also people like you, instructors, to just wait a bit and think, why does it make sense for this person to behave like he does? And concluding this subject on human error and what causes accidents, there is actually another story which Eric will tell us a lot about, I think. People most often save the day. So it's not only the bloody human who makes errors, it's also the genius human who actually fixes all the problems with ATC and machinery that doesn't function and late maintenance, etc., etc. And let's remind, things actually go well most of the time. We don't have accidents all of the time. So we are actually quite good at what we do. Let's sum up. What did we talk about? Is it safe? And one good point to start this question is, what is safe actually? What Dr. Zell meant with, is it safe? He was talking about his diamond stashed away somewhere. What poor babe in the chair being tortured thought about was his toothache. So there are different perceptions about safety, I think. So what does safety mean, if you ask the question? Safety for whom? We talk about the stuff all the time, but do we actually mean the same thing? And then let's keep in mind that little shortcuts like safety and following rules, yeah, important, but not the whole story. Safety and accidents, probably important, but not the best way to measure, etc. I think it's much more important to look how is the work done and what do we think about that, seen from many sides. And I guess that's how you as instructors work. You do not only follow a checklist, this is a good student, you take, to say the Norwegian helhetsvurdering, you assess it from the whole, and not just some simple points. He is really good at following the rules, so he must be a great pilot. I think that's not the whole story. Then over about risk. Again here, think about it from various sides and keep in mind the positive side, because that's often our driver for why we do things the way we do. If I burn my mouth, it's because I enjoy hot coffee. I love the risk. Maybe I should sip it a bit slower. So, and mind those assumptions. And finally, I said, human error, is it really human error, or is it just a label we stick on people based on our quick judgment? So, hold them back, and maybe the most important question in safety ever is, why did it make sense for people to do this? Yeah. Thank you for the overtime. But then I worked in railroads and we do have forsinkelsen. So whatever.